Hey everybody, it's Holly from At Yarn's Length, and I'm here to talk to you about the Summer Stitch Sampler Knit Along for 2020. This is week 1, and we are working the Diamond Brocade Stitch. So if you're just here for the stitch and you're not participating in the knit along, you've stumbled across this in another way, go ahead and skip forward till you start to see some needles and some yarn moving. And you can skip the part about the knit along. For those of you who are here for the knit along, you can find a link directly to the post below in the notes, and you can also find a link to our Facebook group. The Facebook group is not a requirement for the knit along, but it's turned into a pretty good community that's supportive, so you can ask questions if you just want to share what you're working on. Folks are using different yarns for this, so it's interesting to see, what people have picked out already. So I've included a link for that in the notes as well. So feel free to join there. If you do have questions as we start to work through this project and you're not in the Facebook group or on Facebook, you can always leave a question in the comments here or in the comments on the website. Either of those will get to me. They may take a little bit longer on YouTube, but they'll definitely get to me on the blog or on Facebook pretty quickly, and I can answer those questions and any follow-ups that you may have. So the way this knit along works is it is 13 weeks long. This is week 1. For weeks 1 through 12, we'll be working a different stitch each week. Each of those stitches will be worked horizontally across the bottom. So if you're thinking of your Afghan as a long rectangle this way, we're working back and forth from the bottom up. There is no true top or bottom because most of the stitches look beautiful upside down, or right side up, or completely reversible. But just for the purposes of referencing the pattern, we're working bottom to top. So after each week, you're not going to bind off your stitches, you're just going to leave them on the needle. I have had a couple folks ask if they could use straight needles for this instead of circular needles. If you have some that can accommodate 3 or 4 feet worth of stitches, you can do that. The only ones I can think of, though, would be the interchangeable sets that have the long cord with the stopper at the end. So if you got some of those, feel free. You will have that weird uneven weight distribution when you're knitting where the entire Afghan slumps to one side. But if that's a way you're comfortable knitting, or you can support it in your lap, then you do you and go for it. Same thing with double pointed needles. If you'd rather work across a row of those, that's absolutely doable. It may be a little more fiddly, but if that's what you have and that's what you want to work with, you can certainly do that. The finished product will be, like I said, 36 to 48 inches, so you're kind of working with a lot of stitches on a small needle in that case. But again, that's up to you. And then week 13 will be applying an optional border around the edge. I think it gives it a nice finished look. And I'm using the off-white color that I have for that, which I think really, it's neutral and kind of brings the whole thing together. But again, that's optional. We will have a couple of the stitches will have not extra, but dead stitches on the side that aren't actually in the pattern we're working on. So you'll be able to pick those up when we do the applied border. So if it is not part of the actual pattern, and you'll be able to tell because it's not in the repeated section, and you wish to slip the first stitch of each row, that's typically useful. It makes it a little bit easier to pick up those stitches when you're knitting the border on. But again, that's up to you. So when you finish this week, don't bind off, leave your stitches on your needles, and we'll move on to week 2. But here we go, the Diamond Brocade Stitch. So as you know, this week we're working the Diamond Brocade Stitch. I've provided a chart, which is not something you have to use, as there are also written instructions. But if you are looking to flex your knitting muscle and learn a little bit more and you don't know how to use a chart, this would be a great place to get started. This stitch is, it's beautiful, it's very elegant, but it's also very simple. It's only knits and purls, no increases, no decreases. Nothing fancy. We're not doing lace or short rows or any of that yet, and definitely no cables. So it's an easy chart to read, and it should be something that a beginning knitter can do with ease. So just taking a look at this chart and how to work it and as it relates to the fabric itself. As you can see, Diamond Brocade Stitch creates, there we go. It's a little hard to see on this darker yarn, but as you can see, we've got a few diamonds here. This is clearly a swatch and not the full Afghan size. but it will be big enough for us to be able to see the pattern and work it and get an idea of what it will look like as you go. So with regard to the chart, just like with your knitting, you're going to work across, turn, work across, right? So when you're reading a pattern, you're reading it from right to left on these odd rows, and you're reading it from left to right on even rows. So the symbols, depending on which row you're on, are going to change. If you're on the right side of the work, which is these stitches, the odd stitches, you're going to knit where it's blank and purl where there's a dot. And the way you can remember that is knitting is nice and smooth and purling creates a little bump. So I like to think of these as purl bumps. And then on the wrong side, you're going to purl the blank spaces and knit the dots, because of course that means that these will be bumps on the right side of the work. The reason that this particular column is grayed out is because this stitch is a multiple of 8 plus 1. And what that means is these 8 stitches are repeated over and over and over until the last repeat, and then this one is added. The reason for that with this diamond is pretty easy to see compared to some other patterns. As you can see, there's a dot here. When you're working the repeat and shifting it over, this dot becomes the left side dot of the first diamond. Just like this bottom dot doesn't have a top dot, because when you repeat row 1, you're adding the top dot to connect the diamonds. So the same thing works left to right. This is also why in the instructions you'll see to repeat row 1 once more before finishing off the section. And the reason for that is, of course, to close the diamonds at the top. So I am on row 1 again. Let's get started and take a look at what this is going to look like as we read the chart. You can see the 2 diamonds here. The back side of the work doesn't look like much. You can sort of see the diamond. It is a little harder to see on this side. Just looks like stockinette with some gaps missing. And then on this side, this is what the diamond is going to look like. And they're all connected, and it looks almost like a single color argyle, the way that they intertwine. So again, for the afghan, you're going to have some extra stitches on the outside. These are your edge stitches, and for this particular stitch, instead of instructions, you're going to have separate instructions for small and large. Writing them together just got to be a little too tricky and didn't really flow when you were reading it, so I separated them out. And the edge stitches, the number of edge stitches will be different between the two, so just keep that in mind. Make sure you're following the correct instructions for your size. Okay, so like I said, you're welcome to slip that first stitch. I don't know how many of you do that as a regular practice, but since we will be picking those stitches up in order to put a border on, it just creates a more even slip, so it makes it easier to pick up as we go. So I've knit my edge stitches, and now I'm ready to work the first row of the pattern. So I'm working from right to left. That's 4 knits, 1 purl, 3 knits. So I'm going to work my 4 knits. One purl, 3 knits, back to my 4 knits that are here, because I finished this and we're not going to work this one because I'm not at the end. So 4 knits, 1 purl, 3 knits. We'll do it again. Oops. Okay, and these are my end stitches, and we are going to work this particular stitch because of where we are. So we'll knit to the end. Okay. So that's the next row. doesn't add too much, just a couple of stitches. We're going to turn now. And since we've turned, we're now working from left to right on this even row. So this column needs to be worked first because we're coming from left to right. Okay. All right, so now I am to my dot. The dot is a knit stitch on the wrong side, so I'm going to knit one, purl one, knit one, and now I'm going to purl 3. And when I come back around, I'm going to purl 2 again, so that's 5. 3 here, 2 here, so I'm going to go ahead and purl 5. And now we're back to these 3 stitches, so I'm going to knit, purl, knit, knit, purl, knit, and then we'll finish off with purls. So there are only 2 repeats on the little swatch that I'm doing. Once I do those, I'm left with 4, just like the instructions say. We're just going to finish off purling it. So I'll have that nice stockinette edge to pick up. Okay, so now we're starting to see the next set of diamonds emerge.